Welcome, everybody, to the show. This is Counterclipping show number 111 for February 13th, 2023. So I'd like to welcome everybody. Our topic tonight, as you've all been aware, is the Best of Avalon Hill Part 5. We will get to the very end of Avalon Hill today. Let me turn this off. That should be on. Let me turn the ticker on because we're going to have some stuff there in a minute. The beverage of tonight's choice is the Glendronach 12. It is a Highland single malt bottled at 43%, and it's very good and pretty reasonably priced, as I recall. It's been a little while. I've had that bottle for a little while. If for those who do not like the peaty, smoky stuff, Glendronach is one to kind of check out. Yay, autofocus! Come on, you stupid machine. There we go. All right. Well, it'll figure it out sooner or later as I continue to move around here. I wonder if we can fix that somehow. Like turn the autofocus feature off would be fantastic if it's not going to focus, you stupid machine. Anyway, we are clipping. You can't see it because autofocus doesn't want to work. So there we go. Osmanli Harbi, the Ottoman fronts, der Weltkrieg game of the Great War in the East. Fairly big game. There's a lot of like disconnected maps to this and some map cutting that is required. Um, and 3 counter sheets. So still working on West Front, still working on getting it into trays. There has been some additional considerations that have come up since then. So we might talk about that. But if I don't mention it, there is going to be a patrons only live stream this coming Thursday night at, I think I've scheduled for 9 p.m. Probably go for about an hour. And we're going to talk about 3D printing for war games. It's not going to be a tutorial. I'm going to talk about kind of progress and what we're doing and how I can get 3D printed trays or at least the models into people's hands while making it work for everybody involved. So check that out. If you're a patron, you can be a patron for relatively inexpensively. So please check out the link to the Patreon in the notes below in the video description. That is probably the best way to support the channel. Nevertheless, super chats and super stickers are on, and you can help support the channel here tonight by doing one of those things. And that will get your comment highlighted as well so that I don't miss you. They're doing a little better at that lately, but we haven't had an absolutely batshit number of people lately either. Although, I guess we were over 150 at one point last week, so that ain't too bad. Also, do remember to like and the video and subscribe. So thumbs up, hit the little bell icon to get notified when new stuff comes out. That doesn't mean you'll have to get push notifications on your phone. Turn those off. I turn those off. I don't get those notifications from very much. Certainly not from YouTube. So as you know, I can't because I'm subscribed to hundreds of YouTube channels. But if you click the bell, it helps with the algorithm. So, before we go any further, let's pull up the incomplete list of who's here tonight. So, let's say hello to Board Gaming Geezer, Brian Jarvis, Charles Latora, Chet Bell, Krusty Captain, Dale Brady, Daniel Silverthorne, Ed Holtzman, Hopshead NZ, H Tuna, HUN644, ID Jester is in the house. Welcome. Welcome back, I should say. Iggy Cricktal, the legend himself, Fucko, is here. Jeffrey Edwards, Joe Okabayashi, John Stanley, Mad Nerd Workshop, welcome. Mark McNair, Mark Dennehy, Matt Davidson, Meandering Mike, Michael Schmaus, Nerd Workshop, an inspiration on the 3D printing front, by the way. Mark McNair, Mark Dennehy, Matt. Am I missing somebody? North Ranger, Rank Outsider. Welcome to the stream. Ray Musselman, Stacking Limit. Is that you, Andrew, or is that John Longshore? Tim Zales, Tom MC, Tony Mammal, Vicky is back. Welcome back. William Aarons and William Bird. Let me apologize for missing anybody. Joel, welcome. I feel like my voice is actually starting to recover right now. So, and Brent from the Armchair Dragoons is here. So, Andrew, thanks very much for upping your Patreon pledge. That's also appreciated. There is a thank you to you in the ticker, which is now up. I'll also mention that all the socials are in the video description, so check those out if you want to follow me elsewhere. Still probably most active on Twitter, but the Wargamers, Wargaming, Mastodon servers, I think doing pretty well, so check that out. There's a link to that. And there is a invite link to the Discord in the ticker. We are no longer streaming this show on Twitch thanks to the shenanigans of a couple weeks ago. So check that out. Also, check out the Armchair Dragoons latest podcast with myself and Chris Promise from Green Ronin Publishing. We talk about an OGL for Wargaming. If you are interested in that topic, so check those things out as well. Perfidious Albion, welcome back. And John Clark. All right, so we do have some assorted news, but before we get to that, let me mention that the fundraiser for Mark Ruggiero is still going on. Mark's in chemo right now. His wife's in chemo as well. So any support you can offer for them will be much appreciated by them and by me and by the entire community. So the link to that is in the video description. So please do check that out. Chad Kennedy, thank you very much. Much appreciated. Thank you for the support. Hopefully the folks have already seen the Inferno unboxing video from me. There'll be an unboxing video on Thursday. I don't know what it's going to be yet. We'll see what I actually get done. But in any case, at night, the patrons only live stream will be up. I sound pretty gross, actually. And here I started talking about, I guess it's not as sore, but it's still fairly gravelly. So apparently there was some kind of big game last night, and I ignored it, as is my usual practice. I am very happy for the referees that won, and I wish them the best in the coming year. So thank you, referees. All right, so let's get started with some news. First up is a GMT shipping update, which says February 13th. So this is new today. So they're ready to charge and ship for the next batch of P500 products, which includes Battle for White Plains, which I backed out of, Paths of Glory Deluxe, second printing, which I should have ordered but didn't, and the timing's bad right now. Sekigahara, fifth printing, and Last 100 Yards, third printing, and they're going to start charging on Wednesday for this, and then it's usually around a month before people actually start getting them en masse. They certainly start shipping faster than that, but usually. But in practice, it tends to take me 4 to 6 weeks to get something. This time, I wasn't the last person to get Inferno. So apparently, a clerical error has occurred over at GMT. All right, next up, at long last, Winter's Victory is available for pre-order over at New England Simulations. This is the Battle of Eylau in 1807. And it is a very interesting battle, for one thing, very bloody, fought on a series of frozen lakes. Projected release is June or July. They are not dependent on a certain number of pre-orders. They're going to publish it. You can see, where the hell is here we go. You can see that the counters are quite nice. This uses a variant of the Wellington's Victory system. So I'm real curious to see this big brigade commitment and fatigue display. This looks pretty cool. I haven't pre-ordered this yet. Like I said, things are not optimal right now, but you know, I'm almost certainly going to buy this thing. I'm on a significant Napoleonic kick for the last really easily 6 months again, and I expect to have this thing on my shelves at some point. Next up is the Third Winter. Those of us who know where Tony Burkett, the designer, can be located, in the bowels of social media, will have caught possibly that MMP is down to about 100 copies of the Third Winter. So if you are going to get it, it is expensive, but if you are going to get it, it will be more expensive if you wait. You may be able to get it through Gray Rooster. That would be my recommendation. You will get a better price through Gray Rooster than ordering direct from MMP at this point. It is $200 MSRP. It's cheaper through Gray Rooster. It is also an enormous game. So I have no reservations about, hell, I probably got my money's worth out of the thing before it came out. So no problems there. Where'd the Scotch? There we go. Where'd the Scotch go? This is unacceptable. Garrison Venn, thank you so much. Jim is probably playing Winter's Victory right now. So, Clark Commander 1983, thanks, Mark, for coming by. Hope you're doing okay. Garrison Venn, thank you very much. Tom MC asks about the Napoleonic Wars from GMT. What is the best Napoleonic at that level? So GMT's Napoleonic Wars, which is a Mark McLaughlin design, it's a very good game. I have a pretty high opinion of it, but it's hard to directly compare it with, say, War and Peace because it's set up as a multiplayer game. It functions best as a multiplayer game. It's fine with 2 people or 5 people or whatever you got, but I think functions best um, as a multiplayer game, whereas something like War and Peace does not. And I think that that makes it a little bit of an apples and oranges type of comparison. My personal so the apple of my eye in terms of strategic level Napoleonics at the moment is Nations in Arms, which I have not yet actually played. Steve Dolges has done some video on that, probably the most thorough treatment of it on YouTube so far. So check that out. You're welcome, ID Jester. Mark McNair says 122 through Gray Rooster. That's a substantial discount. So go Gray Rooster, right? So that's kind of where I'm at right now. But if you can get it, the new War and Peace from One Small Step is really nice. Don't play it for the campaign. If you want it for the campaign that covers the whole period, the whole Empire period, 1805 to 1815, I don't think it's your game. I think Napoleonic Wars will work better, and will stay more historical if you play it two handed, right, with 2 people, as opposed to playing it with six or however many people it accommodates. I've played that several times, a couple times beginning to end. It's a very good Napoleonic Wars. It's a very good game. Same deal with like something like Empires in Arms, right? I mean, there's really nothing quite like Empires in Arms. It's hard to do direct comparisons between that and something else. Sure, this is true too. Greg Grant says everybody should buy Winter's Victory so people can get done with that and start working on John Butterfield's Hell's Highway, which may be their next thing, but I know it is in the pipeline somewhere. Now, I don't know how closely Winter's Victory sticks to Wellington's Victory. So, um, yeah. So, series from New England Simulations is probably a fool's hope, right? Because their output is so low. They do a game every 3 to 5 years, right? Their last game, Jaws of Victory, was extremely well received, and I think that's justified. But that was uh 2020, I think. That sounds about right. I think that's right. Yeah, I appreciate that they're also taking their time with stuff and making sure that they get it right rather than just cranking out to the limits of their capacity and releasing sloppy product. So I will, say I have been very pleased with everything from New England Simulations that has passed through my hands, which has not that many products, but they don't do that much. Their output is not that much. Oh, I do have one more piece of wargaming news as well. Seljuk, we did an interview with the designer Justin Facino, which those of you haunting YouTube will maybe better recognize as Just a Guard. That video aired on Friday, but you can still watch it. It has now, as of today, has hit its P500 number, so it has made the cut over at GMT. Levy and campaign game on a struggle between the Byzantines and the Seljuk Turks in the years 1068 1071. It looks pretty interesting. This is not a period I know a ton about. I have a very, very cursory knowledge. My Byzantine history class ended before this series of events. So, I mean, this is obviously true, but it also there's a lot of variables, right? It depends on how many people you have working on your team, how many do you have a day job, that kind of thing. So there's a lot of, and I don't think New England Simulations is trying to be the next Avalon Hill or GMT either, right? If they are, they're kind of screwing it up. So Fucko directs this to Stigler, but which version of Wellington's victory is Winter's victory? So I it's my impression, and I'm happy to be corrected on this, that the changes between the two different versions of Wellington's victory are relatively minor. Those two versions being the couple of different formats that SPI did it in. They did it in the flat and in the soapbox, although the soapbox is quite rare. And then TSR did a later version of it, which is the one that I have. I would not particularly care if they hewed to either edition. I don't think there's anything that really screws anything up any worse. I mean, there were some criticisms of that game system back in the day. I think there are maybe a couple holes in it that possibly reflect some development issues. But I don't think that it's terribly meaningful to talk about there being two different Wellington's victory games. I think they're the same games with a couple the same game with a couple of minor details that are different. Frank lives in New England and is ordering Winter's Victory tomorrow. Be very curious to see, Frank, what you think of it. It's certainly pretty. I will tell you that. All right, so moving on to tonight's topic, and we've only got about 20 tonight because I've managed to engineer this such that we only have. I should have probably cut it off a year or two earlier last time. That would have given us more time anyway. Can I make this work better? Not really. Feels like sometimes this works really well and sometimes it doesn't. Oh, that's a good point. Fucko, I am positive that this Winter's Victory is not taking after the Decision Games version. So have no fear on that account. That has been, let's say, the Decision redid it, and it's one of those decision things where they kind of redesigned it, and it was not warmly received. Let me put it that way. I had somehow forgotten about it. That's how warmly received it was. So the maps are fairly nice. I wasn't that impressed with the counters. They're okay. But the maps are nice. I will certainly give them that. Just wait until we do the best of decision games. That show's going to be a comedy extravaganza. So, and possibly very short. So, anyway, Matt Taylor, welcome back to the stream, as well as Andrew Atkin. This is an interesting idea that I think we are not going to get to explore this evening. Kind of a software model, sort of a games as service model for war games. This is certainly not at all traditional. I don't necessarily want to discard the idea out of hand, but I also am not super warm and fuzzy about it either. So we'll see. Um, Jeff Beeler asks, how many games original to Avalon Hill and how many had first been printed elsewhere? So as we kind of go through the history, you will see that there's um, a lot of the early ones up to say the end of the 60s are Avalon Hill originals. A lot of the releases in the 70s are pickups from other places, and even a little bit into the 80s. And then toward the end of the 80s and into the 90s, I think the percent, I didn't do a statistical analysis on this. So if somebody wants to give me metrics, then cool. But toward the end, they start to release more Avalon Hill originals as well. So I feel like there's some missed opportunities here, Stigler, for decision games oriented comedy, and we're going to probably have a conversation about that on the side at some point. The TSR one rules wise looks fine. It's just that the map's ugly, but I mean, what are you going to do, right? They didn't have access to the original maps, and which were better. So they assigned their cartography department to work on new maps, and the maps that came out of all of the original maps. I don't want to say all, but most of the war game maps that came out of TSR were not very good maps, as opposed to having originated with, say, SPI. If you look at their version of Napoleon's Last Battles, it's the SPI map. The counters are the SPI counters. So that did happen where they were able to not redo the graphics, but they were not able to not redo the graphics at least some of the time. And that may have been due to some of the technology that was around at the time that I am in no sense qualified to talk about. So at some point, we should do computer war games as well, but we also need to get somebody that knows what they're talking about as a guest to do that show because um, I am not that guy. Joe Perez says that the Wellington's victory and Quatre Bras is not so much a Napoleonic system as it is a Waterloo system. The sequence of play is rigged to favor the Anglo allies as to when fire combat occurs. So I do have Wellington's victory in the TSR edition and would like to play it at some point. I do also have Ney versus Wellington, which is the Quatre Bras game that Joe is referring to here. I actually picked that up pretty recently, and I'm not sure I've logged the arrival yet. So um, that will be a way to explore that. And I believe Monmouth uses the same derivative of that system as well. TSR was doing good maps for a variety of other products, just not their war games. I will say that the probably the best one, and I haven't seen them all, of the map of the original maps that TSR published in the Spitzer games. Probably the best ones are the ones that they did in ETO and PTO, and they're not awesome. They're just okay. They're not hideous. This is true. Jim could talk for 2 hours about the John Tiller games, actually. So Wellington's victory as a precursor to Labatt is absolutely incorrect. That is that originates with La Bataille de la Moskva, which I believe is 1975 or maybe I believe 1975, which predates Wellington's victory by at least a couple of years. Um, I think this is a fair statement. This is true. This is why, though, that I'm finding Beyond Waterloo very interesting looking. All right, so we're going to start Avalon Hill 22 minutes in here. We're going to have plenty of time tonight. We're going to start with Stonewall in the Valley. This is Joe Valkowski design on Stonewall Jackson's 1862 campaigns in the Shenandoah Valley. This is one of those campaigns of maneuver that the GCACW, I avoided it through a whole video and now I did it here. That the GCACW system is really, really well designed to show the dynamics of. So, yeah, the Gleam of Bayonets maps are not great. They're usable. I mean, the Wellington's Victory map is usable. The Darlene's Greyhawk maps, those are classics. Those are, with the possible exception of the known world gazetteer maps, the Greyhawk maps are probably clearly on top of the TSR cartography heap, I think. So this is actually, until you start getting into the reprint volumes from Multi-Man, this is actually the largest game in the series at 3 maps, and they do not exactly line up straight. They are designed to connect to the maps from Roads to Gettysburg and Here Come the Rebels and Stonewall Jackson's Way. And so you've got them kind of stacked, one's here and one's here and one's here. So table footprint wise, this thing's kind of a bitch. But it's an awesome game. I am happy to have it. I think I got I forget whether mine's punched or not because I keep mixing it up with Stonewall's Last Battle, which we'll also get to here tonight. Joe Belkowski is the originator of the GCACW series, has recently returned to the GCACW team. Happy for Joe and for the rest of us. No, none of the GCACW games have had or have mounted maps. Doug, I have a fondness for those EPT maps, but I don't think they're in the same league as either the Greyhawk maps or the known world maps. I think the novelty for those is that they were printed on a vinyl-like material, whatever that was. So, John, we're going to miss you at Winterfest. I didn't mention what we're playing right now. We are continuing to play Last Blitzkrieg. We're going to play it again on Wednesday. And then on Friday, sometime in the evening, we will begin to play Wacht am Rhein from our good friends at Decision Games. This is the Goss Wacht am Rhein. We believe it to be a good format for the convention. We will be streaming live, is the plan. We will be streaming live next Monday from Winterfest. That was a lag fest last year. So we're going to make some technical changes and hope that that helps. So Marty mentions that NES is a part-time company. Yeah, obviously. Doesn't come out. So on the one hand, this is a good problem to have, right? Their products are good. They're well regarded. The quality is really high. I'd love to see more of them. But if they can't do more of them and they feel that the principals involved need to maintain that pace to maintain that quality, then I'm going to defer to them on that. So James Whitmer is asking about On to Richmond. Presumably, he's talking about On to Richmond 2 from MMP. Official word out of MMP is that is a 2023 project to get that out the door. They've been known to miss those targets in the past, but I do kind of expect to see that sometime late Q2, Q3. That's my expectation. So in any case, Stonewall in the Valley is an excellent volume. The maps, of course, are gorgeous. Here's somebody that's magnetized it and put it on a wall. This is among the densest terrain in the entire series. There's Battle of the Clouds is pretty dense too because it's up in the mountains. This is also, in a mountain valley, so there's kind of a lot of rugged terrain and woods and stuff like that going on here. Nevertheless, I love these maps. These are my favorite maps. The I'm delighted to have this game in my library. Counters are okay. The original counters are okay. They're not amazing, but they're, I think, clearer than the attempts to reboot the counters. So Mo from Mo's Game Table is here. Mo, welcome back. All right, next up is London's Burning. This is a solitaire game of, looks like, Battle of Britain. A pair of Royal Air Force fighters, tactical and operational elements. Normally that appeals to me, but the fact that it's a solitaire game probably makes it appeal less to me. This is designed by Ben Knight. Graphics look pretty good for Avalon Hill of the period. These are certainly decent looking, maybe a little thin, but certainly decent looking counters. Is there a board or display? There is, and I think this looks pretty decent too. But nevertheless, I don't have a lot else to say about this. This is important. Frank says, and Frank is the designer, by the way, was released by SPI in 76, slightly less monstrous cousin to the GDW La Bataille, so an unplanned offspring. That I think is reasonable. To say that it's an answer to La Bataille, I think is a completely reasonable statement, even looking in at it from the outside. Because clearly, right, hey, Marshall Enterprises and then GDW had done this huge Borodino game, right? That was one of the very early monsters. It doesn't predate Dragon Austin or Unentschieden, but as I've been instructed, it is in fact pronounced. But it is nevertheless probably the third, maybe fourth monster game ever released. So what are we saying? What Stigler didn't like Jaws of Victory? I'm unaware of that judgment, but okay. All right, so moving on from London's Burning, about which I just don't have much to say. All right, Geronimo. This is a U.S. Indian conflicts game on a map that is basically the entire western half of the United States. It is, as you can see, an area movement game. This is, I think, in the sort of transitional period when Richard Berg was trying to branch out and do stuff that maybe he was less well known for. And I think this is an example of that. Blackbeard might be another example of that. Although Blackbeard is, the Avalon Hill Blackbeard is on a hex map, and this is not. So there are cards here, as you can say, for Avalon Hill at the time. It's got pretty good production values. I don't really know much about this game other than that. So it sounds like you switch places from turn to turn, which is an interesting mechanic. I don't know if it works. And the rating on this is not spectacular, but what is I don't really care what um, the BGG rating is, right? I think the BGG rating on this is probably higher than the rating for Blackbeard, for example. So this looks like it might be interesting. Richard Berg was certainly somebody that had a lot of good ideas, and sometimes really could have used a strong developer to help him bring those ideas out. I don't know that this was an example of that, but I've never really closely looked at this, and probably it's it'd be real low on the priority list, even when we're just talking about Avalon Hill games. Let's put it that way. Empire of the Rising Sun. Are we working from the correct direction here? We are. Okay. So this is the companion piece to Advanced Third Reich. And it brings that system, that classic Third Reich system, and a lot of extra detail to the Pacific. It is reasonably attractive game. The map style pretty much matches the map style from Advanced Third Reich, so I think it's a pretty attractive map. Component wise, it's fine. I will say that I don't believe that the adaptation of the Third Reich mechanics are really quite fully baked in this edition. I think, and I'm talking about the naval rules here, and Frank will have an opinion on this for obvious reasons, but I feel like the sort of the adaptation of, and there are changes. This is like a different naval system than the one in Third Reich. Well, than in Third Reich. Um, so they did make alterations to it, and I just don't feel like it quite worked. In addition, it kind of began the process of bloating Third Reich into something that it was not necessarily originally intended to be, which there's nothing necessarily wrong with, but it turns it into, I think, a radically different game, and we have an even more radically different game now in A World at War. These two volumes together kind of begin the progression into, oops, that one goes in a different, oh, poop. These two games sort of begin the progression of the evolution of, well, even the variants, the Third Reich variants back in the day. Part of the reason why this system evolved like it did, and as much as it did, is because people played the shit out of it, and they found a lot of holes and loopholes and strategies that could be considered exploits and so on and so forth. So a lot of the Chrome is an attempt to mitigate some of that, right? And no particular care was given to, hey, are we adding dramatically to the complexity here? And as we can see from looking at the 200 plus page rulebook for A World at War, yes, they have in fact added dramatically to the complexity. The core of the system is not really that complicated, but it starts to get bloated here. And if we're talking about Chrome, this adds a substantial amount of Chrome with the research and the politics and all that stuff. Okay, is someone complaining about uh errata in Jaws of Victory? Um, so maybe I'm out of date on looking at the errata, but it did not occur to me that that errata was particularly serious. I am again willing to be corrected on that. Also, in general, and we can and have done a whole show about this. I am pretty forgiving when it comes to rules errata, unless the rule book is a complete shit show, which is a bit of a different story. But corrections in terms of errata that's in the rules, I don't think that's a particularly big deal, assuming that the publisher is making that available. I am considerably less forgiving on counter errata and even less forgiving on map errata. And I don't think that um, stickers to put on your map is really a particularly elegant solution for that, as a couple of different publishers have done at this point. Errata does also happen. So again, I'd have to actually look at the Jaws of Victory errata, which I have not done any time recently. So I don't recall seeing anything that I considered a serious problem. And it's maybe a little more, again, I'd have to look at it. I mean, is it more than trivial errata? Because trivial errata, who cares? They give me an update, great, I'm happy. Um, And I hate map errata. I will absolutely agree with that. All right, so Emperor of the Rising Sun. The rating on this is probably not bad, and it's not bad. Um, I think this game's got significant issues. So this is not one that I think is worth revisiting. If you want this experience, play the Pacific in A World at War. If you want what I think will end up being a better experience overall, play either Pacific War or Empire of the Sun as best suits your tastes. And I think you will be better served by either of those recommendations. So you can link it with Advanced Third Reich, though. I mean that by itself is attractive, but you get that all in one box in A World at War. Stonewall's Last Battle. So this is the first game in the series that's not designed by Joe Balkowski, and this is an Ed Beach design. Ed is still with the series today. This is on the Chancellorsville campaign. Now, this is an interesting game for a couple of reasons. One is that this is the smallest game of the games that Avalon Hill did. Mostly these were 2-map games. This is a 1-map game. And the map is one of the 2 maps from Stonewall Jackson's Way. So, because it takes place in the same area. So they haven't, Multiman has not redone this. They haven't said they're redoing this. I personally think this would fit in a skirmisher, because if you have Stonewall Jackson's Way 2, you already have the map. So just include the scenarios and the game specific rules, a lot of which will be in the core system now, and half a counter sheet, and you pretty much should be covered for that campaign. So I would like to see them bring this back. I'm a little disappointed that they didn't just put it into Stonewall Jackson's Way 2. That would have been fine by me, but they didn't, and it's probably too late now. That has been reprinted and is now out of print again. So, but we should get a new GCACW game this year. Once again, gorgeous Charlie Kibler maps. That's the same map, actually. I shouldn't say they're not new. I don't want to give you the impression that they are new, because they are not. And the counters are, once again, here's the strength point counters. There's nothing really new here either. You will see slightly different. There's a little better use of color on these, and I think Stonewall's Last Battle is the game where they started with that. This really depends. I mean, if it's just some rules changes and clarifications, who cares? I'll just download the book and print the book. I've got a laser printer and a comb binder now, so I'm all set. Although I need more combs, I need bigger combs. So errors will happen. They are inevitable. They are unfortunate. But there's a significant difference between trivial errata and like game breaking errata. And there's a significant difference in errata that can be fixed with a rules update versus errata that have to be fixed with fixed components, which is generally speaking more irritating, particularly if you have to buy a $60 magazine to get those fixed components. That is something I'm not a particular fan of, if we're complaining. As Mo points out, a lot of these teams can use the help. If you've got, decent English chops, not a terrible idea to offer your assistance. I think a lot of folks probably don't know who they would talk to if they were going to do that. But, you could start somewhere. You could talk to the big man in charge. That would be fine. All right, moving right along. Hannibal, Rome versus Carthage. This is the much later, I think, Valley Games edition cover. Sure, we have an original Avalon Hill cover here as well. I have played this in the Avalon Hill version. This is, if we look at I'm just looking for a box cover, man. All right, well, we're abandoning that. If we look at the designer, I want to say the designer credits on the original edition were Mark Simonich and Richard Berg, but it's a Mark Simonich game. I think he borrowed something from Berg from something else. This is a pretty solid game. I have nothing negative to say about it. I didn't think it was quite as interesting as I'd hoped it would be. This is ranked 19th among war games on BGG, and I don't think it's that good. But it's a good game. I have nothing serious to say that's bad about it. So it is a card-driven point-to-point game. There are also like battle cards that you play in the battles, in addition to like the activation cards. We're sounding pretty rough already. Now, if you're buying this now, I can't in good conscience, unless you just want the Avalon Hill edition, recommend that you get anything other than the new. I think the new one's from Phalanx, and that is this thing. This is Hannibal and Hamilcar, and this one you should still be able to get. So this is essentially Hannibal Rome versus Carthage plus the Hamilcar prequel game, or sequel game, something like that. So there's like a whole second game in the box, right? And it's, like I said, solid game. I would imagine Hamilcar is reasonably fun too. Um, if you've played successors but not played this is easier to play than successors. But you'll see a lot of similarities in the systems. Another point, Marty mentions rules cross references. This is true. And indexing is actually difficult, right? Indexing is like a real skill that you really shouldn't just rely on Microsoft Word to do for you, which a lot of publishers unfortunately do. So I liked the battle cards better here than I did in We the People. I will say that. On the other hand, in For the People, I did not miss the battle cards. So, and in other games like that, I mean, it's kind of worked into the game, right? So you don't need them as much, but still. Hey, that's you guys. I'm still talking about Avalon Hill games. We got plenty of time here, folks, too. So, Hannibal and Hannibal and Hamilcar, if you want. Rome versus Carthage, real solid game. It's not one of my personal favorites, but I think, and I'm pretty into ancient Roman stuff. But I also, wasn't quite in love with this thing. Happy to play it again, though. Wouldn't object to playing this again. Let's get rid of that. Let's get rid of that. Here's another one I don't know much about. Air Baron. This is in, I think, this is an Evan Davis. Frank, any relation? Game. Let's find out if BGG has any information on this. Apparently not. Game designer, librarian, and former journalist, known as the designer of Avalon Hill's Air Baron and a game called Crossed Words. So this is like another Avalon Hill economic game. It's one of the last, man, not the last one, as we'll see, but it's one of the last ones that they did. I actually like economic games, but I actually prefer them to be slightly more abstract than this looks. I will totally believe, Marty, that Hannibal still pulls people in at WBC. But then you got the WBC politics to contend with too, and I don't really feel like dealing with that or discussing it. I would like nothing to do with that. So apparently, Air Baron still draws as well, so that's interesting. All right, next up is Age of Renaissance, which I also have played. Design credits, according to BGG, are Don Greenwood and Jared Scarborough. I thought so. So what you kind of expect out of this, I think, is essentially a civilization-like experience. And I think it delivers on that. I think it's not as engaging for me as just regular old Civ would be. Um, but part of that is topical too, right? I'm more into, certainly at the time, more into ancient stuff than Renaissance stuff. I might feel a little bit differently about that now, though. Has anybody redone this? Because I think this is actually one that would be a good one to redo. Looks like Descartes has did a French version. Uh, but other than that, it looks like nobody has redone this. I think that's pretty unfortunate. Um, like I said, I think it's a pretty solid game that I'm maybe not as I don't like as much as I should because of topical interest. Um, there may have been two different covers for this too. Thinking about it, that's a pretty good cover. I got to say that's a pretty good cover. There's a lot of pictures of this too. This was also in a big flat box, which was relatively unusual for Avalon Hill at any point. like a standard board game sized box, more something like that than the old Avalon Hill flat wargame boxes. Marty says that Manifest Destiny from GMT was its spiritual successor, which I have not only not played, but never seriously looked at. Successors. Speaking of phalanx. So when we say successors in this context, we mean the successors to the empire of Alexander the Great, who immediately fell to squabbling amongst them and carved out their own, the most successful of which carved out their own successor empires, if you will. Um, and this depicts that period. It's actually pretty fascinating history. Design on this was Richard Berg and Mark Simonich. Unless I have that mixed up. Where maybe this is the game I'm thinking of, where it's really a Mark Simonich design, and there were some ideas borrowed from Berg, and Berg says, "Sure, cut me in." Um, so this has a pretty good reputation, and this has had multiple editions as well. So we're going to look at versions here because I don't know what version. You never know which version is under which thing. So we have this first, second edition. Now this is an oddball format because you'll notice the landscape box. This is a standard bookcase size box, but it's a landscape bookcase size box, which is like the only one that they ever did like this, as far as I know. Um, and you know that's just weird. But games got a good reputation. So there's a backing up here. So first, second edition came out from Avalon Hill. I'm not sure what the differences are. This is the third one. This came out from GMT in what looks like 2008. And this is the one I would actually be tempted by if there were not a new and massively expanded and fancified fourth edition from Phalanx, which was a Kickstarter. I want to say this delivered something like last year, maybe the year before. History of the World was in a landscape box, but it was a big flat landscape box, not a bookcase landscape box. Okay, Marty says Berg did the first edition. Mark made it better with second and third. Okay, so this is the Phalanx one with the miniatures and all this other stuff. The map looks an awful lot like the GMT map, to be honest. Um, and to be fair, I'm guessing Mark Simonich did the map, so that would explain that, right? I think we're going to get close to a whole counter sheet clip tonight on this thing. There are 3 counter sheets in Osmanli Harbi, which I have to keep looking at to remember how to pronounce. Yeah, I mean, I'm cool with just counters. I mean, I don't need miniatures and fancy pieces and a blow molded plastic tray and all that. I mean, the tray I might like, but it traditionally I have not liked them particularly. See if there's some shots of the miniatures here. These may have been Kickstarter stretch goals. Cool, but then do you paint the miniatures? I don't know. I would just as soon not play this kind of game with the miniatures. And that is not, at least, is not an anti-miniatures position. Yes, Mandarin Mike is correct to just call it Ottoman front, as it says Ottoman fronts, actually, but you know what I'm saying. And that matches the rest of the game series as well. Yeah, I mean, is this overproduced? Yeah, probably. Is it expensive? I don't think the price. I saw it on a shelf at Origins. From, I think Ares had brought it. I think it was Ares. I could be wrong. But somebody was selling it at Origins, and I didn't feel well. I don't remember what the price was, considering the large amount of stuff you get and the fanciness of it. I didn't really have an objection to what it was priced at. So successors, moving right along, it's still going today. Now, this may have been the last economic game that Avalon Hill did. Okay. Stock Market Guru. Design credit here is Stuart Tucker. Apparently, this is a revised version of Stocks and Bonds intended to more accurately model the stock market. I am not positive. that the players of stocks and bonds are really after an accurate model of the stock market, but okay. And this cover totally looks like a cover out of the mid 70s Avalon Hill translations of 3M titles, right? Yes, we are going to finish all the units anyway. Well, all the units on this sheet, so all the Ottomans. So I mean, I don't really know much about this, but because it's an economic game. But like I said, I'd prefer a sort of abstract and clean playing economic game because it's not really my forte. And this maybe more accurate stock market model is something that I'm finding a bit off putting. To be fair. Matt Taylor. So this was the case for a long time. A lot of newer board games with miniatures they're made out of a more typical injection molded plastic that does not necessarily suffer from this problem. But I absolutely have observed the problem you're describing in the past. Abshed and Z. So this is really going to vary by game, right? I mean, it really depends. It could be that Mark Simonich retains the rights to successors. I think that's I don't know, but I think that's completely plausible. And if that's the case, then whoever Mark agrees to do it with they can do it. So maybe that's possible. But I'll tell you what, if GMT were to put a new edition of successors out, even if it was just a reprint with errata of their last edition with counters, I'd be probably more inclined to buy the one with the counters that fits on my shelf rather than a giant ass overproduced thing from Phalanx that I'm going to have problems storing. So the question of who's got the rights is a thing that sometimes even the companies don't necessarily know. And we'll actually get into that a little bit later on. Starship Troopers, prepare for battle. This is not the same game as the original Starship Troopers game from Avalon Hill, which I have played and which is pretty good. This is the movie tie-in. It's a different game. This is described as a fast-paced tactical war game, which begins simply and then adds additional rules with each new scenario. So I don't really have an opinion on this other than that I am generally not going to get super excited over movie tie-ins, and particularly not for a movie tie-in from that particular movie. And that is not really a poo-poo of Paul Verhoeven's Starship Troopers, which I actually think is a better movie than it's often given credit for, but it's still not a good movie. You know what I'm saying? There's a lot of the stupid shit in that movie is based on the fact that Verhoeven basically treated it as a satire. And in that context, it kind of makes sense. Where they're all standing in a circle shooting at the bug in the middle. Like, come on, that's asinine. Jeff Beeler says Command Magazine had Alexandros and published a sequel using its components plus more. Okay. I don't know anything about that. Mandarin Mike hates stock market games. Mo, I'm not sure unless we've specifically said the current edition. I'm not sure that's true of the current edition of War of the Ring, the big fancy one. That may have been true with older editions. But hey, what do I know? The War of the Ring I've got is the one that was designed by Richard Berg. So, all right, Princess Ryan Star Marines. This is a Mark McLaughlin game, and unless I'm misremembering this, apparently I'm misremembering this. I am actually thinking of, I think, one of the Star Wars Phantom Menace tie-ins that's now really valuable. This is not really valuable. This is one of the last games that Avalon Hill did. It's not the very last game, but it's pretty late. And it's also in a board game flat box type box. I remember it on the shelf. And you've got like, I don't even know what to say about this thing, man. The evil Dar Yamaguchi has kidnapped Princess Ryan And now a third-rate group of Star Marines is sent to rescue her. Okay, semi-cooperative team that must overcome a steady onslaught of deadly attacks. Okay. I'm still not buying this, but that is probably more interesting than I was thinking. Um, and you can get this very inexpensively, apparently. Yeah, Queen's Gambit is the game I think I was thinking of. Colossal Arena. So there's a couple different names of this. So let's actually look at this. So, oh Jesus, there's even more than that. So the original thing was this called Titan the Arena. Okay. And as far as I could tell, I never played this. As far as I could tell, this is no relationship to the original Titan whatsoever. Doesn't share designers, doesn't share. This says Rainier Knizia. Um, so that makes it say to me that it's not a strategic card game. You play not as combatants but as spectators. Yeah, this has nothing to do with Titan the Arena. So I don't know why Avalon Hill called it that because Titan's actually a pretty cool game. This looks less interesting to me. Um, maybe it's fun. I don't know. We are getting very close to the very end of Avalon Hill at this point. Doug says that it's a brilliant game, but it does have an IP relationship to the board game. Okay. But says it's a reworking of a Rainier Knizia game called Grand National Derby. So it sounds like Avalon Hill looped it into trying to make it a Titan tie-in. This also says there's very little similar between the two, which I certainly agree with, but there may be an IT tie there. Atlantic Storm. This is a card game based on the War for the Atlantic in World War II. And it has a quite good reputation. Designers credited here are Ben Knight and Don Greenwood. This was redone a couple of different times. One as Pacific Typhoon from GMT, obviously retheming the game, and once as this Atlantic Storm redo from Lock and Load Publishing. To what extent these are different? These only Ben Knight is credited on this one. So I think what that probably looks like, trying to parse Board Game Geek's weird credit and inconsistent crediting system. It looks like Ben Knight is probably the designer on this, and Don Greenwood was the developer. So moving on from all the different Atlantic storms, they are supposed to be good fun though. 1998. We are now in the final year of Avalon Hill's existence. So let's get to the goofball one first. Monsters Ravage America. Ben Knight, J.C. Connors. Each player is one of 6 giant monsters stomping across the map of the USA in search of cities to destroy. This does sound like it predates King of Tokyo by quite a bit and is a little different scope anyway, but you're still playing giant monsters, right? It's definitely does not predate the creature that ate Sheboygan. Princess Ryan's Space Marines was originally published by East Wind Rain Company and Simtac, according to Jeff Beeler. Okay, that's interesting. I didn't know that was a pickup from somebody else. And Marty says Atlantic Storm still draws 100-ish people at WBC, which I could totally understand. A very digestible game and almost optimal for that kind of let me phrase that a little more carefully. It's a good convention game because you can play it relatively quickly, but WBC is a convention that they take a week to play, so you can play a big game at WBC as well. And I mean, come on, yeah, I seriously, this is why people love the creature that ate Sheboygan, really. And our volume is fucked up again. Oh well. All right. So the last 3 games are all war games, okay? And there's a Avalon Hill product, an ASL product in here, Doomed Battalions. That was one of the last handful as well, but I've elected to leave out the many ASL products for this episode. Later published as Monsters Menace America. I've seen that. I didn't realize that was a redo of one of the various monster games. We have 3 games here, all of which this is very interesting to me because this is the last gasp of Avalon Hill. Okay, we have about 5 games in this last year, and 3 of them are absolute uncontested classics. Okay, one of which is On to Richmond. This is part of the Great Campaigns of the American Civil War series. This covers the Peninsula Campaign, where McClellan lands a force on the Virginia Peninsula and gets thoroughly outmaneuvered by Robert E. Lee, who makes his name as a strategic genius in this campaign. This is another one where this has been out of print, as is being mentioned in the chat. This goes for a pile of cash. It is being redone, and these prices are depressed from where this was. You will still see on the concept marketplace on Facebook people trying to get $350 for this thing. Whether they're getting it or not, I don't know. I wouldn't at this point. I would wait for the reprint, which is going to have a bunch of additional material in it anyway. Now, that said, I think this is maybe one of the best games in the whole series, because it's another one of these campaigns that really emphasizes the value of maneuver and initiative. It is a campaign that plays really, really well to the strengths of the great campaigns of the American Civil War system. So this gets a absolute top recommendation out of me, which I don't think will surprise anybody. But um, at this point, if you're thinking of buying it, I would absolutely wait for the reprint from MMP, which, as we've already covered, will probably be out this year. Probably. Another thing you might try on miniatures you're having trouble getting paint adhering to them is washing them with hot soapy water. Um, So James Whitmer, part of the reason here is that it came out at the very end. And I think that a certain amount of their warehouse inventory may have been disposed of. I believe it to be actually rarer in terms of number of copies in circulation than most of the other games. Also, it's kind of likely that, say, Stonewall Jackson's Way might have been gotten a couple of printings. This obviously did not. This came in right at the very end. It was one of the last things that they did. Great game, great cover, beautiful Charlie Kibler maps, all that stuff. We are going to do one more. I'm going to pull this up. So in On to Richmond 2, you're getting 3 things in that box. You're getting the entire, so it's best to think of the series as it's currently being constructed in terms of modules. And most, but not all, of the MMP volumes contain multiple modules. And the Avalon Hill games are basically individual modules. So Stonewall Jackson's Way is a module, and Stonewall's Last Battle is a module. On to Richmond 2, for its stratospheric MSRP, has 3 modules in it. So it's basically 3 games, right? 3 full-size games. It's got On to Richmond 2. It's got Grant Takes Command 2. Now, this is the Overland campaign that features the Battle of the Wilderness. Very interesting. This is another great format. Now, this is the one game in the series, though, where the maps aren't done by Charlie Kibler. And these are actually Rick Barber's maps. And it's clearly kind of an attempt by Rick Barber to kind of make the game look like the previous games in the series. Rick Barber had a super distinctive graphic style, so I don't think that worked. I don't think these look bad at all. Actually, I still think they look very nice, but you can totally tell holding these up to one of the other games in the series that that this is done by a different artist. Charles Latore asks, how many GCACW games did Avalon Hill actually do? 7? Hold on, we'll count them out. We got to use fingers for this, right? So Stonewall Jackson's Way, Here Come the Rebels, Roads to Gettysburg, Stonewall's Last Battle, Stonewall in the Valley, On to Richmond. Am I missing one? I don't think so. So that would be 6. And then we're up to like volume 12 or 13 in the series now. 7. Maybe I did miss one. The skirmishers were done by Multiman. So we're being clear on that. However, I think the early skirmishers may have come out while Avalon Hill was still around. I haven't checked that, but that's possible. Now, Grant Takes Command was published by Multiman, okay? But if you, it was clearly in the works when Avalon Hill was around, because when you open it up, it looks like looks exactly like an Avalon Hill game, and it is even in the Avalon Hill slightly smaller sized bookcase box. So this wasn't one of Multiman's first things because they were doing ASL stuff before this. If Grant Takes Command was published by Multiman, it says Multiman on the box under license from presumably from Hasbro. And it came out a couple years after that too. And remember, this was the end of the line for a long time until Multiman decided, in an example of somebody at Multiman making a great decision, to resurrect this series with Battle Above the Clouds. So that is why I didn't count Grant Takes Command, because it was published by Multiman Publishing, and BGG is correct on this one. So I thought I would mention that as a maybe we can call it an honorable mention or as an addendum, because it clearly was developed by Avalon Hill. That's absolutely true. Next up is For the People. This is another uncontested classic Mark Herman game. And this I feel is like the first full flowering. I know the mechanic appears earlier in We the People, of the card-driven game mechanic. This is where I think it first fulfills its potential for war games. I think it does it here. Now, there's a absolutely enormous number of versions of this. So let's look at it, because there's foreign versions, there's Spanish. Yeah. And for some reason, BGG's not giving me all of them, but whatever. This thing's in like its 4th edition from GMT right now. If you're going to buy this, definitely get the GMT version. It's very nice. Here is the original Avalon Hill box, which I think is not the worst cover I've ever seen, but it's not the best cover I've ever seen either. Unless you have a particular predilection for the slightly undersized Avalon Hill bookcase box. And I kind of get that, right? I mean, it'd be nice to have an Avalon Hill version, but I've got the GMT version with the mounted map and all that stuff. And I think this probably had a mounted map in it from Avalon Hill. I could be wrong. This says mounted, so I'm gonna take it as mounted. I'm not gonna try and parse the pictures. This is a strategic level with a lot of operational flavor. American Civil War. It is a fantastic game. This is the game that got me into American Civil War wargaming. It does kind of look like Bill Nye, actually, which is one reason why I think it's amusing. If I could see why folks might think this isn't like their favorite CDG, because I think there are some other avenues that have been pursued by other designers, but I still think this is a really strong CDG. I think this holds up as well today as it did the day it was released. It is a groundbreaking game, maybe less groundbreaking than We the People, but it's still a great game. It's a classic. Carl says that the next version of For the People will have a new map. That's interesting. Will they give me a new version of the new map to go in my old box? They might make the map available. James, so interestingly, I was about to say this is a completely different apples and oranges thing, but there's reasons to make this comparison. So one of the inspirations, if you read the designer's notes in GMT's US Civil War, which is a Mark Simonich game, one of the first things that Simonich says in those designer's notes is, hey, here are the kind of the primary inspirations for other games here. And not everybody, but people keep saying, oh, it's just a new version of Victory Games Civil War. And I'm like, it's got a lot of similarities to Victory Games Civil War. But there are 2 other games that Simonich mentions as big inspirations, one of which is For the People. And you can absolutely see that if you've played all 3 games. The other inspiration, for the record, was Europe and Asia engulfed for the action card mechanic. Um, that to me is less clear, but that's because I haven't played Asia or Europe engulfed. So, um, bigger box and new map kit for the people in P502. Okay, that's cool. I am gonna pass on the bigger box. Actually, I believe that update kit I might do, but um, I believe I can get that whole game in one box now with the aid of 3D printing. So we might be looking at that. I upgraded my Empire of the Sun to the new edition for the three. The biggest reason was for the 3-inch box, so I could fit the whole game on the shelf. So generally speaking, if the game fits in a 2-inch box, I'm happy to put it in a 2-inch box because then it takes up less shelf space. And this will remain in print from GMT, I gotta say. Pretty strong Roger McGowan cover, I think. Also, next up is Randy Heller's Bitter Woods. I'm not sure which of these things came out last. I think of the three, I actually think it was on to Richmond, along with Doom Battalion. Um, This is Randy Heller's game on the Battle of the Bulge. It's a classic. It still gets a lot of play. There's a big tournament of it at Compass Expo, like a big, well participated in tournament at Compass Expo, which had a lot of players and ate up a lot of tables and all that. Very, very popular game. I have been asked on occasion, what's the definitive Bulge game? And I haven't played this, and yet I am kind of inclined to say if you are looking for the definitive Bulge game, some people are going to say like Bulge 65 or something like that, but I think this comes the closest. I think this is a very strong design. There's a new version from Compass. If you don't want to run down the Avalon Hill version, I had the new version from Compass and got rid of it, and really shouldn't have, but I did. So maybe I'll grab an Avalon Hill edition. I don't really have a good visibility on what the differences are between the editions, other than in the physical components. So after departing Avalon Hill, this went to L2, which did a big, fancy, fairly fancy version of it. And this was pretty typical L2 production: bigger counters, bigger map, all that stuff. You'll see one of these. You'll see every single edition of this on the table at Compass Expo, and maybe WBC too. I'll let Marty speak to that. I agree with this. To some extent, it is an apples and oranges type of comparison to compare um, for the people to U.S. Civil War. They're quite different games. That said, Mark Simonich was inspired by, among other things, U.S. Civil War. So I get that too, and therefore I think there are reasons why you can have a conversation about both series. I think we're about done because this game, like the previous one, is going to end up in 3D printed trays, and I don't want to eat 5 GMT trays for it because right now it's just going in a GMT tray. So I think we're done, and I don't want to get on another tray in the middle of the show. So, Pretty Salvian says Bitterwoods and Ardennes 44 maps were done by the same artist. It's interesting that the artist is not credited here. Artist Mark Simonich. I don't think this is weird, considering Mark Simonich designed Ardennes 44 and obviously did the map. Well, not obviously, but he did his own map, as he usually does. So and Mark Simonich has done a lot of work for other designers too. So I actually don't think that's weird particularly. I'm going to completely agree with Mark Hodkinson here on 2 different topics, 4 different games. They're all really, really strong games. Chad Kennedy says, is Bitterwoods worth getting? Yeah, but the easiest one to get right now is going to be the one from Compass, which does not have mounted maps. It has paper maps, but it's 2 maps. So I'd kind of prefer paper maps if it's that big. But they're oversized hexes and oversized counters. Ooh, good question. But it's way earlier than this. I'll tell you that. So I mean, SPI did that from time to time. Greg Grant says MMP's last Blitzkrieg is better than both. So maybe, but there we get into kind of the apples and oranges type of comparison too, because last Blitzkrieg is a monster game. And I'm reluctant to I'm happy to say of these games, which one would I prefer to play? Last Blitzkrieg. But it's a big project to play Last Blitzkrieg, right? Um, so I'm reluctant to draw direct comparisons to the other games that we've just mentioned. Um, Charles de Torres says he likes Bitterwoods the most of his various Bulge games. Drew Ditterer asks about House Divided. House Divided is very simple and abstract. It is, I think, not directly comparable to either of the other two. That said, there's nothing wrong with saying one prefers, House Divided, which is a classic and is totally worth revisiting. Panzerblitz might have been, but I'd be reluctant to make that statement without actually checking the original SPI stuff because they may have used silhouettes on those. I don't know. I'd really want to check that. But that's super duper early. I think the date on it is 72. Is that right? 1970. That's misleading though. Um, so if you look at Tactical Game 3, this is kind of the original Panzerblitz, right? From Dunnigan and SPI. And then if you go to Panzerblitz and look at versions, um, this says Avalon Hill did a slipcase edition in 1970, and I think that's probably accurate. But it Tactical Game 3 precedes it, right? So, and I'm not sure. I'd have to look into that. Do we have a scan of the counters? Look at this. There's silhouettes for the armor. And some interesting, some historically authentic symbols for artillery as well. That is very interesting. So here's the question on this: does the silhouette convey useful information? Okay. And the example of this is because it's fresh in my head right now because we're playing it is Gauss, right? It means something if the symbol on the counter is a vehicle silhouette rather than a NATO symbol, right? That means it's an armored unit. Okay. There are hybrid units which will actually have both a NATO symbol and an armor symbol on them. So um, so I'm in favor of if it's useful, give me the information. If it's not useful, if it's just a decorative thing, I would just as soon have NATO symbols, but I don't really have a strong preference on that, to be honest. Stacking Limit says Tactics 2 was first, and that would have, yeah, that would have beat this. But I'm not looking up Tactics 2. So, yeah. But so Andrew Atkins says that for noobs that can't read NATO symbols, the silhouettes are, I think he means to say essential. Gets newbies into the game, computer games too. Certainly, computer game designers tend to agree with this statement. I have been living with NATO symbols since approximately 1980. So this is not really a problem for me. But some games, like the 1985 series from Thin Red Line, Under an Iron Sky, and so forth, they're using a lot of the modern NATO symbols, which we don't often see in war games for things like helicopters and air defense and things like that, and or signals intel, that kind of stuff. The So some of those symbols are relatively unfamiliar. But that said, anything from World War II on back, I'm good with NATO symbols. I do think there's a little bit of a learning curve, but it also depends on topic, right? So let's say, for example, that you're talking about Civil War or Napoleonics. There's only 3 symbols to learn, and I don't think that's a big ask. Infantry, cavalry, artillery, boom, you're off you go. Maybe there's a separate leader counter with a dude's face on it. Perfidious Albion mentions he likes how Doomsday Germany has double silhouettes to show which is dominant. Okay, I mean if it's useful, if it's providing me with functional information, then I am generally in favor of it. Um, I'll be honest. I got to be completely honest with everybody here. I don't. Can I tell the difference between a silhouette between a Tiger and a Sherman? Yes, but honestly, between like a Panzer III and a Panzer IV, I probably can't tell the difference. So to me, it's meaningless chrome. This is true. So we've talked about this before. GTS uses the historical symbol set that either the Allies or the Germans used. And while we might call those NATO symbols, there was no NATO yet, they're not quite the same for the Allies. And for the Germans, they're totally different. However, all of the functional information on the counter is in the factors or the color of the factors or the box that the color of the box that the factor number is in. So the symbol itself is kind of irrelevant in the case of GTS. This has not necessarily been the origin of the NATO symbols is NATO. So we in wargaming, I'll talk about this too. We in wargaming tend to use NATO symbols as a kind of shorthand for the traditional wargaming counter symbols. Okay, these have never really lined up 100% with the symbology that NATO actually uses. They're very similar in a lot of cases. Some of the symbols are, in fact, the same, but the professional military stuff contains a bunch of additional information that we don't necessarily need or want in war games. So, this is true, but I'd prefer to put that into the game rather than to make me guess what the. I mean, are the two things different in game terms? If they are, then there fucking better be something that says that on the counter and not make me have to tell the difference between the silhouettes of the Panzer III or the Panzer IV, right? And to be fair, I can't think of an example that confuses things in that way. Longest they did use those symbols, but in longest, unless I'm misremembering this, I'm happy to be corrected. Unless longest day doesn't put every piece of information you need on the counter, so you do need to learn the historical symbols. And there, I mean, can you learn the historical German symbols? Yeah, you'll get used to it, but it's not necessarily. They're completely different than the ones the U.S. and the British were. Chuck, thanks for stopping by. Um, I mean, I'm fine with them the silhouettes being there. If we're saying that it is merely for flavor, cool. Then it becomes just a strictly preference thing. I'd prefer clarity of information. That's why I prefer NATO symbols. But I am not strenuously objecting to the use of silhouettes either. There are examples of games that include both, like the new Barlev from Compass, for example, which I gotta tell you, I'm really gonna probably not buy, but I will buy Valley of Tears, which is the God damn it, which is the there we go, which is the Arab Israeli War BCS game that's coming because I'm that high on BCS at this point. Um, so, but that new Barlev, I've heard bad things about the rule book, but I've also heard good things about the game, and it's certainly pretty. And it also includes two complete counter sets. If you want to play with NATO symbols or you want to play with silhouettes, you're good. Streets of Stalingrad, you did the same thing. That's true. Big. This I feel is a big turnoff, to be honest about it. So Panzerblitz does. Panzerblitz actually tells you, but it's built into the game too, right? Yeah, there's a difference between the vehicles, but it's built into the factors. So whether you have and from a flavor or mood building aspect, it's a lot more appropriate the lower in the scale you go, right? If we're talking about platoons of tanks or something like that, then I think symbols make a lot of sense. If we're talking about armored divisions, I would just as soon see NATO symbols. I got to tell you, I'm not super duper thrilled with Spectrum. I'm hoping the fiber people come out this way soon. I'm not holding my breath on that, but I'm not super duper happy with Spectrum. Russian campaign is finally out. It is in people's hands. I'm told there's a copy coming. We'll see what happens on that. I have received nothing resembling a shipping notification, so we will see. Um, but I will note that I want to say it's a 24-page rule book. The original had something like 4 pages of rules or something like that. The Jedco version from Compass has, I think, a 12-page rule book, not all of which is rules, and which obviously is relatively big print and illustrations and all that jazz. Milky 55 Way 2012 hates NATO symbols. That's fair. I mean, if you prefer, you know, and there are certainly thematic reasons to not use NATO symbols, right? If it's a squad level tactical game, would you use? I don't. Generally speaking, there's no way you'd use NATO symbols for a game like that. You generally depends. You may not need to remember the hierarchy. So, for example, in a game like Holland 44, I'm doing this from memory. So if I'm getting this not exactly right, bear with me. You've got some regiments, you've got some brigades, you've got some battalions. Okay, those are different size units. Normally, battalions are going to be subordinate to regiments or brigades, but who cares? They're different units. They're discrete units for the purposes of the game, and that's the important thing. So I don't know that it matters. That said, this is another thing you do kind of get used to, right? Don't forget the smoke, right? Medieval less smoke, but Napoleonic and Civil War, there's a shit ton of smoke. So very easy to a major factor on Napoleonic battlefields was the degree to which people couldn't see what was going on because of the smoke. So I would want to get an official word on this. I think the last thing that they did was doomed battalions. But that's anecdotal, and I don't necessarily trust it. So I would want somebody who was there at the time. As soon as Hasbro bought them, they basically dumped the entire staff. I'll also point out, by the way, that Hasbro, and I believe this to be the correct number, Hasbro bought Avalon Hill for $6 million in 1998. Now, this is 1998, right? It's about 25 years, exactly 25 years ago, in fact. Um, that is worth about 11 million today, 11, maybe 12 million today in 2023 dollars. That's friggin' peanuts for the hundreds of games that Avalon Hill had. And Hasbro's idea was that they were going to turn all those into computer games. That did not go well. They turned it over to Hasbro Interactive, which eventually got dissolved or sold off, but they kept the Avalon Hill part of it, eventually handed that to Wizards of the Coast. That went well. And then that just in the last couple of years was handed back off to Hasbro Corporate as its own thing. So Avalon Hill still exists technically. If you look it up on Wikipedia, it does say Avalon Hill is and not Avalon Hill was, but there's no Avalon. I mean, this is not the same thing at all. It's a logo now on various Hasbro products, including Risk, by the way, or at least some editions of Risk. Um, this was, even at the time, this was peanuts. Um, I mean, this is basically the case, right? So, I mean, to me, the essential piece of information that the NATO symbol is conveying is not the size of the unit necessarily. Remember, a lot of games just leave that off, but the type of the unit, right? Is it an infantry division, whatever it is? Is it an infantry? Is it armor? Is it what is it? Right? That's more important than the size because the size is generally going to combine with the factors on the counters, if assuming there are factors. The size on the counter is going to be in comparison to the size of the counters on the other side of the game, right? So I wish there was a pop out comments feature on Facebook, but on StreamYard, by the way. That would be really nice to have. Um, Making sure that I've covered all the topics. I believe we have covered all the topics tonight. So we are now done with Avalon Hill. And I'll give you a slight heads up. I'm going to do these kind of best of shows kind of every other week. That's the kind of the plan because they do take some significant prep. So next week's show is going to be the live from Winterfest show. And I will probably have special guests. So bear that in mind. But might just be Doug. But that'd be great. I'd be delighted to stream with Doug again. We'll try and make it work from a technical perspective better than it did last year. And we're going to probably talk about monster games because we'll be playing a monster. We'll be in the very midst of playing a monster game at that very time. So I may wiggle the schedule back and forth to maybe start it at 7 Eastern or maybe start it at 9 Eastern. We'll see. I'll shoot for 8, but we'll see if that actually happens. So that's the plan for next week. So, so I mean, the symbols that NATO is currently using are not identical, right? I mean, a lot of them are very similar, right? But they're not identical, and the professional stuff includes a lot of additional information that we don't care about in war games normally. So the history of ranks is actually fairly interesting. Find good information that is appearing in the chat here. So, but I mean, certainly those symbols have been. I'm going to clip these last couple here. Have been used in war games for a long, long time. It would be an interesting exercise that I do not personally have the time to engage in to see what the history of that in war games are. Joel asks if NATO has a balloon symbol. They might now. Not sure they did before. I suspect that there actually is a symbol for airships, but I could be wrong. I don't know. Yeah, so that is a separate Chad. That is a separate thing that should happen at Winterfest. So we'll see. We'll see what happens. I definitely want to have a discussion with Dean about a couple of things. But if we can get that to happen, we will get that to happen, and I think we can get that to happen. There, I don't really have anything of value to contribute to the us shooting down UFOs thing. Stacking Limit says, smash that like button. I agree. Hit the like button, share the video around, subscribe to the channel if you are not already subscribed. I don't get a lot of new subscribers on this show for some reason. But sometimes I'll leave OBS running like till the next day. And then I'll be like, on the other end of the room working at work, and then I'll hear like ding ding ding, or I'll hear the gunfire sound that indicates that someone new has subscribed, and I'll be momentarily startled. So it would be interesting to see the Soviet symbols actually. See what they were using. I really don't want to see that in the game though, unless it's given me something very valuable. If it's just going to be some cryptic squiggles, it's like I don't need it. I don't really object to it at that level. Again, I'll use as the example GTS, where everything you need to know is in the factors or in the colors. Where yeah, they're using the historical symbol, but it's just for flavor, really. Um, Chad Kennedy, we're going to have to get you to Buckeye Game Fest then, aren't we? I will be at Buckeye Game Fest playing La Bataille. This is interesting. This culturally probably makes sense, if correct. This is also true, right? So there's NATO symbols for things like commissary units and SIGINT units and all kinds of stuff that generally don't see a lot of uh, presence in war games, right? Um, you see them every once in a while, right? Like in uh, a hot dry season, for example. Signals intelligence is very important, right? Intelligence in general is very important. And there's a critical SIGINT unit for the U.S. that don't get it overrun, right? Provides very valuable utility for the U.S. Uh, Jeff, I gotta tell you, probably no. Um, Driving 6 hours, just to kind of visit and look around. I mean, there's no dealer's room, there's no seminars, there's just a bunch of old dudes playing games for the most part. Yes, Devil's Cauldron does have the Waffen SS marching band. Um, so there's that. I mean, I don't know that it's a I don't know if it's a historical band symbol or not, but it probably is. This is a great point by Ye Old Geezer Gamer. Ship designations, right? These are not necessarily transparently obvious. What's a BB? A battle blip? What's a BC? A battle cruiser? I mean, you gotta like figure these out, or look them up, right? CA is short for cruiser armored, but basically means heavy cruiser. CL is a light cruiser. CV is a carrier. CVL is a light carrier. CVN is not even sure I remember. So yeah, these get super hairy. And don't necessarily correspond to English. I suspect that some of them maybe didn't originate in English. I'm gonna have to look at this obviously, since I have the new edition of La Bataille de la Moskva. CVN nuclear carrier. There we go. That explains why I hadn't seen it, because I haven't played a modern game like that. Drug Detterer mentions the Starfleet battles. Yeah, Starfleet battles does that too. Plus, they made up a bunch of their own, so that gets super duper hairy. So I mean, but it's the same thing with NATO symbols, right? You get used to them. I'll tell you, Pacific War helped. As somebody that hasn't played a lot of naval games, right? That aren't flat top, and in flat top, you're not really super concerned about the symbols because you've got like this counter is the Enterprise, right? You don't have to deal with the entire Pacific Fleet. You're just looking at those particular scenarios. Jeff Bueller asks, "What is the Winterfest hotel rate?" About $80 last I checked. So it's pretty inexpensive. And Ohio doesn't have super duper high hotel tax. So yeah, is another good point actually. AO for Oilers and stuff like that. You normally don't see these represented by counters in war games, right? Even though they were military assets, nobody wants to track fuel status, right? Apparently. But there were situations in Coral Sea where one side or the other said, "Oh, we've spotted the enemy fleet," and then they send a big attack wing after it, and it's an oiler with maybe a PT boat in escort. So these were significant. Military's least significant, had impacts on the campaign. Not necessarily, I mean, because they carried fuel too, but also just because limited intelligence. Doug says that in SPI's USN, the Oilers are crucial. Makes me want to check that out, actually. So it is flatly not true. I don't really want to talk about this, but let's talk about this. It is flatly not true that the Waffen SS were uniformly elite and awesome soldiers. In there were some formations that were elite and did perform very well. There were also some formations that were not elite and performed quite poorly. Um, so it is a massive oversimplification to say that they were all these super elite guys. And in particular, remember that there's a lot of rear area formations whose military duties consisted mostly of massacring civilians. And when they were, and occasionally those people got caught in combat and they folded up like a paper napkin in a lot of cases when that occurred. But just as fast as the Italian black shirts. So, but I mean, certainly, if we're going to be analytic about it, there were certainly SS formations that performed very well. There were also a fair number that performed very poorly, and kind of the most of them performed average. Um, I mean, they were still issuing, they wouldn't issue cigarettes to them. They gave them candy instead. So the officers weren't for the record, but the line soldiers were pretty much. I think the real problem with this, I think this game is at an unmanageable scale. Pacific War with daily turns, Um, I've got it. I've fiddled with it a little bit. It's like if you're really into it and want to do that on daily turns, okay, but man, that's asking a lot. Even though the computer's keeping track of a lot of the doing a lot of the scut work for you. So don't forget that they prioritize the gear even within that organization though too. So if you're in the one of the rear echelon units, you're maybe not getting the first pick of the gear. And that was a source of the sort of the parallel military organizations of Nazi Germany. Remember, it wasn't just the SS; it was the Wehrmacht and the SS and the Luftwaffe. They were parallel militaries. That did not do the Germans. That did not help German overall strategic performance. Let me put it that way. I would love to see that personally. Empire of the Sun for PC. That would be great. GMT, get on that. Um, Drew, are you saying that there is a game called the Southwest Pacific that you played, or that this is a scenario in a larger game? Yeah, I think. I mean, and you're talking to somebody who's going to go spend 8 9 days playing Goss for a week. For 18 hours, about 18 hours a day, but easily going to be 12 hours a day. And I'm saying I felt like War in the Pacific, the Gary Grigsby's Admiral's Edition War in the Pacific was just too much. The learning curve is really high. There's a manual, but I don't want to read a 200-page manual for a video game. I'll go read the Goss book first, frankly. Old C64 game. I mean, you can understand this is a complicated topic, right? I think it deserves that treatment. I'm not saying, and there are certainly people who have gotten a lot of value out of that War in the Pacific digital game. But and if you play it once, I think you'll get your monies out of it, even though it's still like $80 or something like that. But it was too much for me. I'll play Pacific War first. This is completely true. Yeah, the Italian black shirts just evaporated. And there's SS guys like that too, right? Like the SS Police Division, for example. They were not soldiers and they were not considered soldiers. They were considered policemen with the duty of massacring civilians in the rear area. So, um, you're going to get on Monday. This is not going to be a structured video, but expect to see significant talk on this topic happen on the next week's show. So, okay. So, what else do we got here? New arrival, Scorched Earth. I bought a Scorched Earth. Unfortunately, two of the counter sheets are so badly registered that they are unusable. Now, I did manage to find a replacement for one of those two counter sheets on eBay. It was overpriced, but it wasn't $60 either. It was $20. So that should be coming. And if anybody has an extra Scorched Earth or Europa counter sheet number, I think 48, let me know. Ney versus Wellington showed up. Fifth Corps showed up. I think I mentioned that last week. Napoleon's Art of War, Eylau and Dresden, which I believe uses the same symbol as the Napoleon at War quad, which is the less well regarded of the two Napoleonic quads, but I don't think it's a complete turd either. So I mean, it really depends. If you're talking about like overall military performance, right? I think you look at the Italian army over the course of the time they were in the war, and their performance was generally fairly poor. But if you then go down to like the tactical level to look at companies or battalions, you will find plenty of examples of Italians fighting very well. Generally, their equipment was shit, but so there's that too. So we have. I had the misfortune of having some fairly significant 3D printer issues yesterday. That pretty much took the computer down for the day, and I think I got one usable print off of that, and that's one of those little parts trays. Um, not well, you put I'll put counters in it, but they're not the bins I've been making. These are just little generic trays you set at the table and can put markers in or whatever. Um, the I changed the nozzle, the print nozzle for the first time. That was interesting. It's fiddlier than you'd want it to be, right? But we got that done. We then proceeded to have we had what I felt was a nozzle clog. Okay, I was not getting feed of the filament. And after troubleshooting it a little bit, I determined that was not the extruder, that it was a clogged nozzle. And it turned out that that may have been the case, but there was also other problems in the hot end. So what you have is this filament that runs through this extruder, which is a couple little gears that just ratchets the filament down through this tube that runs into the print head, which is called the hot end, which has, among other things, cooling fans and a thing that heats the filament up and melts it and all that. The Teflon tube that comes with the printer, and this part of it is already installed, so I didn't do this, usually is installed kind of slapdash, and you'll end up with gaps between the bottom of the filament and the top of the nozzle where melted filament will, and that's in the hot end, so melted filament will accumulate in there and cause clogs. You will also, and I had some scorching issues with a certain filament that I was using for a while as well. So when I actually pulled this thing apart, the ending was all covered in this like black oily tar like material, and I'm like, Jesus, this is gross. So I replaced all that stuff because I had spares, right? The spare parts for this equipment is thankfully fairly inexpensive, and you can get it reasonably reliably from Amazon. So I also have a spare extruder and hot end coming that should be here tomorrow, just to have them so that because I was afraid at one point that I was going to have to replace that print head. You can get the whole assembly, you can get upgrades, you can get whatever, but I just bought a new hot end, it's like less than $20. So didn't occur to me the first time I tried it, but you replace the nozzle, you presumably made some adjustments, you should probably re-level the bed. I ended up having to do that a couple of times very fastidiously. Also, you should probably clean the bed before leveling it. And one thing that a lot of the bed leveling tutorials didn't mention is that you should heat the bed to your printing temperature while leveling it, which is like 60 C. It's hot, but it's not like, oh my god, I'm going to burn myself. Or I can feel, you can actually feel the heat radiating off it, but it's not super duper hot. You can handle it. So we got some comments here. So we had some 3D printing misadventures here. Uh, Carl says he just played Legion Wargames La Primogenita and it looks good. That looks like a pretty good game. I'm very curious to see that. Tom MC asks if he's been missing recent Traveler content. Not from me because I haven't done anything lately. I do have some RPG stuff that's in the queue and I just haven't managed to get to it. Some of that's Traveler stuff. Some of that is frankly Traveler stuff that's going to happen a couple of months from now. But there's another couple of RPG things that I want to get done. In the meantime, there's Karn stuff, and I have not had the time. You know, I'd like to blame the CSRs, but to be frank, the 3D printer is partially to blame as well. So, Garrison Venn, are we going to be able to scale production enough in order to sell these trays? We'll talk about that on the stream on Thursday because I'm going to want, part of the point is to get input too, right? So it's theoretically possible, but probably not. Well, we'll talk about it on Thursday. Patrons only live stream on Thursday. Let me pull that up so I get the time and give you the accurate time for when it's scheduled. I think it's 9 p.m. That is 9 p.m. Figure it's going to go till 10. The Italian ships were generally pretty good. Maybe not as good as the British or American ships, but they were generally pretty, or German. They were generally pretty good, but yeah, they didn't sortie very much. So, I mean, that was an issue. Doug mentions that the new version of High Guard is available, and there's like a mini campaign set in the Solomon Rim that just came out that I haven't looked at yet at all. I don't have, and I'm getting involved in what sounds like it's going to be a monthly GURPS campaign as a player. So it's not going to be a huge load, and hopefully we can swing it. But the creating content for RPGs right now is just not something I've had time to do. Nerd Workshop says install the tube into the hot end all the way down to the nozzle, then tighten the lock nut at the top. Yes, so I did it the opposite way based on some videos that I watched, where you tighten the nozzle all the way, then back it off a full turn, then stick the tube in the hot end, then retighten the nozzle. So it's the same idea. I did the fitting at the top last. Well, not really last. I guess I probably should have replaced the other fitting on the extruder as well. In any event, after kind of a whole day of fiddling with it and leveling the bed a couple of times and changing the nozzle again, I do believe it's working now. Of course, this happens when I'm like happily printing for several days and then suddenly I have something I need to get this done on this timetable. And then problems arise. So it will be, I spent $40 on spare parts. Plus, this is yesterday. Plus, I have nozzles and springs and a bunch of other stuff. Some of the stuff that you can just print, right? If it's not metal. This way I have the parts if I need it, right? I've also got 2 extra print beds that I haven't bothered installing yet. I think the glass print bed on the Ender 3 is kind of terrible. I have yet to get anything to stick to that fucking thing. The new High Guard is basically just updates. There are a decent number of statistics changes where like things have new values and stuff like that. I don't consider it essential. Get it if you feel like you need it. But I don't consider it essential. If you've got the old one. So if you haven't gotten the most important thing in that book is frankly the Starship construction system. And that's now in the core book with the 2022 update. So which was a good move. Didn't like that they left it out. I get space and all that. So What we haven't heard anything about is the negotiations for a new Traveler Open license. We haven't heard anything official about that, but the vibe I am getting is somewhat pessimistic, unfortunately. I appreciate this very much so. I got your email too. So I appreciate that. I've gotten a lot of stuff done on honestly, I mean, one of the things that's eaten up more time. I mean, I'm not constantly babysitting the printer. One of the things that's eaten up the time is the design, which I find I'm enjoying. And I would like to learn a better piece of software than Tinkercad because Tinkercad's got some flakiness to it, but it's also super easy to use, and I'm kind of used to it now, and I've got like a shitload of designs. So and everything I'm doing is like simple geometric designs, which Tinkercad is generally fairly good at. So Alistair Logie asks, is there a core set of Traveler books you need to get started? So the Core Rules 2022 update is there's a ton of additional material. Okay. However, in keeping with the tradition of Traveler, you can get an absolute lifetime of play out of that core book. Now, the previous edition, it's the same edition, they just made some changes to numbers and format. Um, the previous Mongoose Traveler second edition book left out the starship construction, okay, which is kind of an important piece of Traveler traditionally. But the new edition, the 2022 update, brings it back in. Um, you got everything else. You've got the literally the tools to create your own universe are right in that core book. There's all the support material you could ever want, and between whatever version of Mongoose Traveler and whatever version of traditional Traveler, there's probably very good cross compatibility. Where the editions that you have compatibility issues or concerns with that you got to like work on it, is like GURPS Traveler, obviously Hero Traveler, Traveler D20, and Traveler: The New Era, which used a completely different system. Other than that, almost anything. If I'm like designing ships, I think you'd want to redesign the ships. But for like characters and skills and stuff like that, I think you can just eyeball it and update it in your head on the fly. The transhuman space is a pretty cool setting. I like GURPS as a system. I mean, it's got sort of flavor issues where that's it comes with the territory. It's generic, right? I mean, it's going to have flavor issues. Do remember to thumbs up the video, as Jeff Beeler mentions. So I have uh, the first significant challenge I faced with the 3D printer after printing like maybe four, maybe five things successfully, and everything worked great. Was with bed adhesion. So I did a couple of things to fix that. One of which was order a set of feeler gauges because I did not like fiddling with that fucking piece of paper. Am I using paper that's the right thickness? I don't know. I'm not checking it. So I got the feeler gauges. Now I know how much space is there, right? And actually I think it's better for like determining the amount of friction because both surfaces are smooth. So that along with it made me a lot better at leveling the bed. Even then, I still can't get anything to stick to that glass build plate. So I'm using a glue stick. There are folks who look down upon that, but presumably they have upgraded to magnetic beds. I do have a magnetic bed, which I have not yet bothered to install. So Ariete and Trieste were, in fact, good Italian divisions, and there's a number of that. There's also a very large amount of third party and first party Traveler content on Drive Through RPG, right? You can get all the old GDW stuff on Drive Through RPG. Yes. That's a facile answer, but it's an answer. You can play Traveler as an RPG. There are Traveler war games, straight war games. There are Traveler wargamey things that kind of link into the RPG. You can play it as a miniatures game. There are miniatures rules for it. And you can obviously play the space combat with miniatures if you want. But it is at core an RPG with some other stuff surrounding it. But don't forget that the first appearance of the Traveler universe is in the wargame Imperium, right? We talked about this before. There are standalone war games for ground combat, boarding combat, starship combat. Are the old Traveler books compatible with the new system? So mechanically, if you're like trying to do ships, you end up having to convert the ships. But if you're just like looking at the old adventures and stuff, yeah, you can. The systems are a little different. The skills scale a little differently, but to the extent that they're different, you can absolutely eyeball it. GURPS Traveler is its own thing. I always felt like GURPS was not an awesome fit for Traveler from a mechanics and for other reasons, including like not using metric reasons. But that said, a lot of the material that they did for GURPS Traveler was really, really, really high quality. What kind of setting for the GURPS campaign that you'll be playing? Asks Meandering Mike. Looks like time travel, but I may have more to say about that later on. Again, it depends. I mean, if you gotta like, if you like see an old starship or something, you'd probably want to actually work to convert that. But if it's just adventures, just use it. I mean, just use it. Stick glue is far superior to non-stick glue. For normal glue purposes, I disagree with this. I think the glue stick evaporates pretty fast. But the glue stick, it's just a regular Elmer's glue stick that's purple, and then when it dries, it's clear. You put a thin coating on the bed, you could print probably 15 prints without redoing it. Ed Holtzman says that the auto bed leveling sensor is $40 well spent. I'm still kind of looking at that. I don't feel like I need that. It's not like I'm constantly releveling the bed. If I was, I would absolutely feel like that. And there is a decent amount of free traveler stuff too, so that's worth looking at. Yes, there are figures available. So the Second Dynasty people are doing miniatures for both 28 millimeter like people miniatures and 28 millimeter starships and little starships. So, but there's at least another source for Traveler, like specifically Traveler miniatures too. But Traveler's pretty broad sci-fi. So if you got sci-fi miniatures that you like, unless they're like recognizably Space Marines, I wouldn't use those. But if you've got like sci-fi looking people or Shadowrun miniatures, for example, you could totally use those. I don't know if they're Shadowrun miniatures anymore. The GURPS Traveler line was very popular. I am not convinced that a lot of people played it as GURPS Traveler. I think a lot of people wanted it for really good material, really good algorithms, actually, in say GURPS for our Trader, which has got like a whole economy simulator in it. You could totally spreadsheet that shit. So also, GURPS has best in class support for technology. So one of the things that makes it a kind of a little bit of a hassle to convert between GURPS Traveler and any other Traveler is that GURPS Traveler uses the GURPS tech level system rather than the Traveler tech level system, and the scale is a little bit different. Traveler tops out at about 15 or 16. GURPS tops out at about 12. So the scale from like modern forward is different. But once you get past that, GURPS has the best support for like different levels of technology, low tech stuff, mid tech stuff, high tech stuff, crazy tech stuff. You've got support for all of that. I still haven't updated the firmware. I'm still got the firmware that came in the box. And until I have a pressing reason to fix it, I'm not inclined to monkey with it, to be honest about it. So, Doug mentions 3D science fiction figures rather than traveler specific miniatures for like people miniatures. Yeah, I would agree. For the ships, I'd want the ships that look like the actual ships, but you can get those from Second Dynasty. Star Wars miniatures generally, I mean, if there's stormtroopers, don't use those. But the yeah, this is true. I believe they release this for free at Christmas time. You can get by with some of the Imperial Guard, maybe. Um, Tau, maybe. Tau look more conventionally sci-fi than most other GW 40K miniatures, I think, which all of which look very idiosyncratically 40K. But the Tau, and I like of the current miniatures. I mean, I see the miniatures, right? I like the Tau the best. I like the look of the Tau the best. All right, folks, we are 4 minutes over time here. So next week, live from Winterfest, more or less on time, we will get that done. And I have all the assets set up for traveling, all the files and stuff that I need to make the videos and all that stuff are all on the laptop. I'll have to load the laptop up and update everything up, but we're not touching that until Thursday. So, reminder that there should be an unboxing video at 2 p.m., which is the new release time for unboxing videos on Thursday. There will be a patrons only live stream about 3D printing for Wargaming. So now's a great time to sign up for the Patreon. You don't need to be a specific patron level to watch the live stream. That link will go out to all patrons. But I will have an announcement that will affect patrons at the swordsman level and higher. So I guess bear that in mind. So I'd like to thank everybody for watching. Please do thumbs up the video. Support for the channel is greatly appreciated, particularly at this trying time in 2023. There's some stuff that happened that I'm not really don't feel comfortable talking about on the stream. We're fine. Everything's going to be fine, but we're representing an inconvenience. So support is appreciated now, if not a little more than ever. So once again, thanks everybody. We'll be back in 2 weeks with a regular show, which will probably be, I don't know what it's about yet. So we will see. We'll see what happens on that. So this week we got Dan is on his own tomorrow on his channel. And he is on his, I will be joining him, but also on his channel the following week, because I'll be doing that from Winterfest as well. So, and that's pretty much it. So everybody have a great rest of the night, and we'll see you all again soon.